Honestly, I've seen it way too many times. People buy these really high performance internet plans that they don't really need because they don't have a good way of estimating how much internet speed is needed in their home network. Well, that stops today. In this episode from Network from Home, I'm going to be giving you a process you can follow to approximate how much internet speed you need for your home network so you can make sure you get an internet plan that's actually a good fit. When it comes to estimating how much internet speed you need for your home network, I want you to think of your home like a power plant. Yes, you heard me correctly. Just stick with me here for a second and you'll see exactly what I mean. Power plants need to plan how much energy they're generating at any given point in time to make sure that any households in the area get power when they want it. How do they go about doing this? They go about doing this by planning for the highest possible demand at any given point in time. In other words, they are generating power for peak demand at any given time of the day. This results in the power plant generating more energy than they need most of the time, but this covers them in the instances where there's a spike in demand. If they didn't do this and they only generated power for exactly what was needed at a given point in time, whenever there's a spike in the energy demand, it would result in houses without power and there wouldn't be enough energy to go around. You often see this play out in areas when there's really high temperatures during the summer. Everybody starts cranking their air conditioning and the power plants are not generating enough power to provide all these homes with the energy they need for their air conditioning. This leads to brownouts and blackouts because there's not enough energy to go around. Your home internet is the same way. You want to design your home network so that you have enough internet speed to meet the times of peak internet demand and peak internet usage in your home. Before we get into the process of estimating how much internet speed you need for your home network, there's one term I really need to make sure you understand. This is the term bandwidth. Bandwidth is another way of saying internet speed, but it's the proper term to use here because when we mention the term internet speed, we're not really talking about speed. Bandwidth, or internet speed, is really just a measure of how much data you can be receiving from the internet at any given point in time. I previously made a video explaining what bandwidth is, and I also give a few examples of how bandwidth functions for a home network. I recommend you go and check this out before moving forward if you don't feel like you have a good understanding of what bandwidth is. As a quick refresher here, when we talk about internet speed or bandwidth, I want you to think back to our power plant analogy. Bandwidth or internet speed is the amount of power that you're currently generating as opposed to the speed of a car, for example. Okay, now we can get into approximating how much bandwidth you need for your home network. We really only have to answer one question here, and that's because we're designing your home network and your internet speed to meet the peak demands of internet usage in your home. So the question I want you to answer is, at most, how many people are using the internet at the same time in your home? To get a little more specific, I want you to think about what's the most amount of people that are streaming in your home at any given point in time. When I refer to streaming here, I'm talking about YouTube videos, Netflix, watching any sort of video over the internet. What is the maximum number of people that are doing that at the same time in your home? This answer can be vastly different depending upon your living situation, and that's why it's the most important question to answer. If you have children at home that are in school, you may have multiple instances of people streaming at the same time, whereas if you live by yourself or with one other person, you may only have one or two people streaming at most at any given time. Once you take the time to think about this and you have this number in mind, we'll feed it through my bandwidth calculator. Before you get overwhelmed here, this is a very simple calculation, and I'll walk you through it using my home as an example. Here we are with the bandwidth calculator, and we really only need to input one value here, and that's the value of the maximum number of people that are streaming in your home during times of peak internet usage. Using my home as an example, I only live with one other person, that's my wife. But with that said, there are occasions where we are both streaming different things at the same time. Maybe I'll have a YouTube video going, maybe my wife will be watching Netflix, so the number we're going to put in here is 2. I should also mention here that my wife and I occasionally have people over our house to visit, But in those instances, we're never really streaming more than 2 different things at once. When we have guests at our house, we're usually either watching something together or we won't be watching anything at all, so it won't be a time of peak internet demand. On to the next step here, all we have to do is take this number and multiply it by 30. So why are we using 30 here? That's because the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, you might recognize the logo that's on the bottom of just about all your electronic devices, but the FCC actually has a webpage where they detail the minimum bandwidth requirements for different internet activities. I'll link to that page in the description section, but in summary, that page details the bandwidth that's needed to check your email, to browse the internet, to stream ultra high definition video, to listen to music online. You name the internet activity, they break it down there with a minimum bandwidth required for that activity. Again, because we're designing our home network for the maximum bandwidth demand, we're going to use streaming here. The FCC identifies 25 megabits per second for ultra high definition streaming, but I bumped that up to 30 just so we have a factor of safety here and we're making sure that we're planning for enough bandwidth in our home. That explains why we're multiplying by 30 here, so let's go ahead and do that. The last step in this calculation is we want to take this number we currently have and we want to double it. And there are a few different reasons for doing this. The first reason is that most people access the internet using Wi-Fi, and when you're using Wi-Fi as opposed to a wired Ethernet connection to the internet, very rarely do you get that maximum bandwidth that your router and your internet plan are providing. On top of that, when you sign up for an internet plan and it promises a certain amount of bandwidth, that bandwidth is an up to number. That's the maximum amount of bandwidth that you'll get with your internet plan, and very rarely do you actually get that number. This is something I've tested in my home and I never get that maximum bandwidth number. That's why by adding a factor of safety here, we can ensure we have enough bandwidth to compensate for these factors. The fact that we're using Wi-Fi and we might not be getting the same speed as an Ethernet connection, and then also that our internet plan most of the time isn't providing that maximum bandwidth that it promises. Okay, so in doing that, let's go to the next step. That's 120, which brings us to a total of 120 megabits per second. That's the estimate for how much bandwidth I need in my home network. Once you have a minimum bandwidth number calculated for your home network, go to your internet service provider's website and take a look at the internet plans they have available. You very likely will find that your minimum bandwidth needed falls between 2 given internet plans. I know that was the case with me. I believe there was an option for 100 megabits per second, and there was another option for 300 megabits per second. Again, the number we calculated is a minimum bandwidth required number, so I went with 300 megabits per second. It was a little bit more expensive, obviously, than the 100 megabit per second plan, but I was willing to pay that to ensure that I would never have performance issues when it comes to accessing the internet. So is this 300 megabits per second internet plan overkill for my home network and my internet needs? Yeah, maybe it is a little bit, but at the same time, I'm also not paying for an internet plan that provides 800 megabits per second or a gigabit per second. This is the case that I see very often for most people, is that their bandwidth needs are around the same as what me and my wife's are, but they're paying for 800 megabits per second or a gigabit per second. They're spending all this money and they're not really getting a benefit out of it. This leads us to the biggest takeaway I want you to have for this video. Having additional bandwidth does not provide you with a faster internet connection. Going back to our power plant example, if you have 120 houses in a given area, but you're generating power for 800 or 1,000 houses, all this extra energy you're generating just gets wasted. It's not like the lights in these homes will shine brighter because you're generating extra energy. These homes will only be using the energy that they need, and that's it. That's the same thing when it comes to bandwidth. If you pay for all this extra bandwidth, it doesn't make your internet speed faster. It doesn't make you load videos or web pages faster. It's just bandwidth that you're not using. Again, I'll say it once more to hammer the point home. Your internet speed or bandwidth is not miles per hour of a car, it's power generated by a power plant. All you need to do is make sure you're generating enough power, and that's it. So as long as your internet plan is covering what you need in your home network, that's all you need to do, and chances are you can probably save a few bucks by doing it. So I encourage you to go and take a look at your home network, evaluate what your minimum bandwidth requirements are, and then make sure you have a proper internet plan for your home. If you have any questions about this process or about the bandwidth needed for your home, please drop a comment below. If you found this video useful, or if it saved you a few bucks, please give it a like. That way it gets shared with other people that can benefit from this information as well. And lastly, if you like this type of content and the videos that I put out, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. There'll be plenty more coming down the line here, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. As always, thanks for checking out this episode from Network from Home, and we'll catch you on the next one.